Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar on the science of supporting your workforce through COVID-19. My name is Bree Harvey. I work for Achievers as an employee engagement evangelist. Yes, that's a real job title. And I couldn't be any more thrilled to be here because over the next hour, we're going to talk about the research and findings the Workforce Institute has created to help you guide your organization through the different phases of recovery of this pandemic. Before we get started, a few quick housekeeping items. Although you have been muted upon entry, we would absolutely love your participation by having you submit any questions you have throughout the presentation using the Q&A function in your console. Our goal is to get to as many questions as possible at the end, so please don't be shy. For anyone who may need to pop off early or may need to rewatch a certain part due to any unforeseen at-home distractions, don't worry, we got you. We'll be sending out the recording in the next 48 hours. Now, let's talk about the agenda for today. We're going to start with some lightning quick intros, then examine the key challenges and opportunities for supporting your workforce through these unique conditions. We'll spend some time exploring the incredible free resources the Workforce Institute is providing and talk about how to best use them. Then we'll wrap it up with some key takeaways and open up the floor to Q&A so you can get real specific with your questions. Okay, I am so excited to introduce Dr. Natalie Baumgartner. She is our Chief Workforce Scientist at Achievers, which means she leads our efforts to ensure that everything we do, and I mean everything from our technology to our thought leadership, is rooted in science. She also leads the Workforce Institute, which we'll talk more about in a moment. Dr. Natalie describes herself as a culture and engagement nerd. Her PhD is in clinical psychology, and she has more than 20 years of experience in researching and consulting on culture and engagement. She's been featured as a TEDx speaker and is a regular contributor to Forbes. Dr. Natalie, welcome, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Bree. I'm really excited to be here and to have an opportunity to talk about this topic, which I believe is critically important and just so relevant during this unprecedented time, supporting your employees through a crisis or a sustained critical event. But before we dive in, I wanted to give you a bit of context, as Bree mentioned, on the Achievers Workforce Institute, because it's the source for the information and perspective that I'll be sharing with you today. So what is the Workforce Institute? The Workforce Institute is the science and research arm of Achievers. And by design, we're a cross-functional team of really passionate leaders from data science, product, customer success, marketing, and more. And we all work together to bring a workforce science focus to everything we do here at Achievers, as Bree said. And there are those two main outputs of the work we do at the Workforce Institute. The first is thought leadership. We translate academic and business research into digestible, usable insights that we share through articles in Forbes, as Bree mentioned, or Harvard Business Review, and also through our own insight papers and unique reports. Our goal is to make workforce science accessible to all business leaders. The second area of focus is on guiding the development of our products, of the Achievers products. All of our technology is built on rigorous science, and that means that it evolves as science does. Now, Achievers' vision is to change the way the world works. And so, when the pandemic began, we saw an opportunity to help employers support and engage their workforces during this really challenging period. We know that crisis is when people are most vulnerable, including employees across every industry and every role. As an organization, then we looked at several ways to give back to the business arena, all of which called upon the Workforce Institute to begin with science, by first creating a model that we could use to guide a pandemic support response across our entire organization and all of our efforts. We began by looking at research and best practices that are proven to support employee well-being during critical events. We dove deep into the academic literature and made the most of those 20 years of experience that Bree mentioned that we've spent in empowering organizations to engage staff, regardless of the circumstances around them. Our goal was to empower employers and leaders and managers to provide support to every employee, which we know is highly predictive of great outcomes for both individuals and companies. A science-backed approach is the most likely way to get you the best results. When you have to act fast, it's still best to act on data, not assumption. Okay, I want to start by diving into our topic by talking about the key challenges that we identified as most impactful on employees during a critical event. These are the factors that your employees are most likely to be struggling with. And after we run through those challenges, we'll look at how you can counterbalance those stressors with strategic protective drivers to support your people. To help you remember these key stress points, I've created a bit of a mnemonic. Remember the phrase, "we burn," and you'll have the first letter of each challenge. The challenges include well-being, balance, uncertainty, resources, network. So let's take a look at each of these in turn. We'll start with well-being. This factor is focused on your employees' physical and mental health. When well-being suffers, so does engagement and productivity. Now, unfortunately, the social isolation associated with this pandemic elevates a number of risk factors for well-being. Physically, it's harder to exercise with gyms and yoga studios closed, which means that many people are leading more sedentary lives than they're used to. It's true that many people can still get outside and jog or hike, but that loss of a typical routine or an in-person exercise group can still have a tremendously negative impact. There's a great deal of research linking regular exercise to work productivity, so that reduced access to those resources can ultimately result in a direct impact on work output or quality. In addition, the pandemic itself, along with the social isolation I just referred to, is simply a very stressful situation for most people. And we know that that stress can precipitate health issues, including negatively impacting the immune system. Okay, the other aspect of well-being that's at high risk during this period of time is mental wellness. Stress, anxiety, and depression are all common mental health consequences associated with an ongoing trauma, like a pandemic, and also with extended isolation. Pre-existing mental health challenges are also really likely to get worse during an event like this, particularly given the significant level of uncertainty that we're all living with right now. Okay, let's talk next about work-life balance. While remote work can help improve work-life balance in some cases, for those who are new to it or just found themselves having to step into it unexpectedly, there are often new challenges to manage, including switching between work and personal time. Work-life balance for parents has been particularly challenging, as I can attest to with 3 young daughters, with this novel addition of homeschooling children thrown into the mix. In all, the specific nature of this critical event has thrown us a number of curveballs when it comes to trying to pay the right level of attention to both work and home life. And a lack of work-life balance is a really important predictor of burnout. And with so many stressors already impacting your workforce, burnout due to lack of balance becomes a real possibility. This is especially true for frontline workers, who are likely working longer than usual hours and under new and typically more stressful circumstances. Monitoring and managing work-life balance is critical to supporting the health and the productivity of your team. Uncertainty. Uncertainty is an engagement killer. When employees don't know what to expect, feel out of the loop, or are worried about what's coming next, it's almost impossible to focus on their day-to-day tasks. This is true all of the time, but it's a bigger concern right now when there's so much uncertainty in the world. And an ongoing sense of uncertainty, we know from research, can result in lower performance, lower engagement, and higher levels of absenteeism, even when working from home. Now, much of today's uncertainty is certainly out of our control, but that makes it even more important that employers do everything they can to reduce additional uncertainty for their workforce. The next challenge I want to talk with you about is resources. In this new reality, whether employees are working from home or on the front line, ensuring that they have the tools, resources, and support they need to do their jobs effectively should be a top priority. Providing necessary resources is one of the 5 pillars of engagement. When employees lack the tools that are key to their ability to be successful, you can expect to see productivity and job satisfaction suffer. And what's more, employees that are working from home may have new resource requirements or may be struggling to set up a workspace that allows them to be effective. And those who are still working on the front line may need resources that are different to protect them now as they work. All of these new demands can absolutely be a challenge to manage. And research shows that it's key to meet basic needs first, such as equipment and safety gear, before focusing on the more sophisticated needs like professional development. Finally, in our list of challenges, we come to contact with a support network. Now, when I speak about support network in the work context, I'm referring to managers or leaders and colleagues or peers. While we've all had to adjust to virtual meetings and video calls, many people are still experiencing lower levels of contact with their professional and personal circles at work than is ideal. Where in an average day in the office, employees run into and speak with perhaps dozens of people, today many of us are isolated in our homes with just family, and in some cases are isolating alone. Contact is a human necessity, so don't underestimate the importance of the loss of this fundamental fuel for people, even for introverts. Being isolated and feeling isolated, though, are 2 separate things. Trying to address and reduce the impact of isolation is important in helping your employees feel connected and supported through this outbreak. All right. Now that we've covered some of the most critical challenges facing employees during this pandemic, let's switch gears and talk about the antidote, otherwise known as the protective drivers. Implementing our in-depth research process, we identified 6 key drivers that help protect the health, happiness, and productivity of employees during a critical event. As part of that assessment process, we ensured that these drivers were rooted in science, were clearly measurable, and most important, were actionable. Monitoring and proactively acting on these drivers will help ensure better outcomes in the long term as we, the business arena, work to navigate the challenges in front of us today and those ahead. Let's look at each of the protective drivers and the science behind them in turn. We'll begin with information sharing. This protective driver focuses on the extent to which your organization is effectively sharing critical information during this period of time. This driver taps into the risk of uncertainty that we discussed just a few minutes ago. We talked about how uncertainty can impact engagement and productivity, and one of the most powerful ways to manage and reduce uncertainty is through information sharing. Your employees need to receive information that's both timely and credible. Research shows that employees are more quickly able to cope with change when they feel they're being kept in the loop with relevant and accurate information. The 3 pillars of effective information sharing are consistency, transparency, and balance. Consistency refers to the fact that your communication should be frequent, accurate, and specific. If possible, it should come from the same senior leader to ensure a consistent voice. And remember to be planful and thoughtful in your communications. Ad hoc messaging is not enough here. The second pillar of effective information sharing is transparency. Now, I know that transparency can feel challenging during a crisis often. You may wonder where to draw the line, whether there are limits to what you should share. Research, however, shows that transparency during a critical event enhances organizational trust, increases job engagement, and improves how employees view their company overall. Effective transparency basically ensures that information is sufficient and accessible, embraces accountability and authenticity, and encourages participation and openness. All right, finally, what do we mean by balance in information sharing? Well, academics talk about promotion-oriented and prevention-oriented communication. Basically, one focuses on growth and ideals, while the other looks at risks and responsibilities. Leaders need to include both forms of communication because your employees are surely at different stages. Some are focused on the positive and what's next, while others are still focusing on fears and risks. The latest research shows that promotion-oriented communication becomes more important in a crisis because people are already focused on the negatives. So bringing an optimistic, forward-looking viewpoint is really valuable. The next protective driver I want to discuss with you is support. Ensuring that employees have the resources they need to achieve success in their role is critical. And having the tools, the technology, and the plans necessary to effectively move through this unprecedented time is a major predictor of long-term success. As I've mentioned already, access to necessary resources is one of the 5 main levers of employee engagement. So there are a few things to focus on when you're thinking about support and resources. The first is ensuring that you're taking a holistic view of resources. And by that I mean that support includes physical tools such as computers, safety equipment, and specialist tools. However, it can also include resources that are less obvious, such as work relationships, supportive management, and organizational level benefits. All of these resources impact employee well-being and organizational performance. Second, look at resources as hierarchical. Research shows that it's important for workplaces to meet their employees' core needs first, setting a foundation for meeting more sophisticated requirements over time. This means that it's key to provide support such as basic tools, resources, and that safety equipment before working on things like career growth and stretch assignments. While career growth is certainly a critical tool for retention, if you're not fulfilling your employees' basic needs, they're not going to be motivated or productive enough to even think about a long-term career path. So start with the basics. The easiest way to determine what those most critical resources are for your people is simply to ask employees about what they need to fulfill their commitments and meet their objectives. This doesn't mean that you need to provide every requested resource, but you should regularly assess support needs to set up every individual for success. Moving on to balance. There's just no doubt that work-life balance inevitably suffers in times of crisis. Now, some of this just can't be changed, but offering sufficient support and just checking in to see how employees are feeling about their ability to balance work and personal obligations is extremely important. Studies show that balance, though, begins at the top. Harvard Business Review research demonstrated that the attitude of management is crucial to instilling a culture of work-life balance. Employees who work with a supportive supervisor report reduced work-life conflict, improved health, and increased fulfillment on the job and at home. One of the first ways that you can encourage better work-life balance during this time is by modeling it from the top. Leaders and managers should ensure that they're switching off, that they're taking vacation time, setting realistic deadlines, and having reasonable expectations of their employees. Only 1 in 10 employees say that the work habits of their boss makes it easy for them to have a good work-life balance. We need to address that. Another tool for supporting work-life balance is allowing for work-life flexibility. Whenever possible, offer flexible work hours to accommodate personal life necessities, such as those rare opportunities for doctor or dental appointments during this time, or time to drop off or pick up children if your children are in daycare or under the care of a professional. And understanding that employees working from home may take breaks to walk the dog, do laundry, and so on. Supporting these personal needs helps your employees perform better during their working hours and helps them better manage their work-life balance. Well-being. A strong correlation exists between stress and crisis, which can lead to physical and mental health challenges. If well-being is compromised, everything else comes to a standstill. An important tool for improving well-being lies in training managers to be active and engaged. Passive leadership, or leading without that sufficient connection we've talked about, it's harmful to well-being. Research shows that passive leadership is correlated with employee burnout and physical symptoms, along with work-life conflict. And positive manager relationship behavior in the form of support and trust building promotes employee well-being at work. Beyond supporting managers, there are a few other methods you can use to encourage well-being. One is to support employees in taking part in physical activities. Now, while in the past that might have meant subsidizing gym memberships, in today's world of social distancing, it might instead mean supporting virtual run clubs or hosting video yoga sessions. At Achievers, we've historically held a weekly yoga session in the office, and that session has now been converted to a remote experience so that employees can take part virtually during lunch breaks. Another technique to addressing well-being is a focus on mindfulness. We know that that can reduce burnout, anxiety, depression, and stress. A couple of ways to encourage mindfulness in your workforce include introducing mindfulness training into your organization, which you can do remotely, or hosting weekly meditation sessions. Well-being is fundamental to the success and effectiveness of your people always, and particularly during this time, as is contact, which is our next protective driver. Now, we'll look at two forms of contact with leadership and contact with colleagues. Let's begin with leadership contact. Ensuring employees have sufficient contact with leaders and managers is a critical tool in times of challenge. In fact, meaningful contact will amplify all of the other protective drivers we've just reviewed. Employees who regularly meet with their managers are nearly 50% more likely to be engaged. A recent Harvard Business Review survey found that employees wanted remote managers to check in consistently and regularly. Now, this can be achieved through a weekly one-on-one or through daily communication using a tool like Teams or Slack. What's most important is that leaders are available to provide support to employees no matter where they're working from. Encourage your managers to schedule weekly check-ins and to have those informal chats as well to keep communication freely flowing with direct reports. I'd also really encourage managers to use video during these times of connection. I know Zoom is the new meeting room, but body language is a key aspect of communication for humans. So using video for calls will likely improve feelings of camaraderie and connection. A study from the Fraunhofer Institute shows that people concentrate better, feel tasks are divided more fairly, and report discussions to be more open during video conferences. Manager contact is critical for employee success. From the frequency to the quality of contact, there are so many tools that exist today to help, but a key factor for success is your availability and ability to communicate clearly. If there's only one thing you change in your new normal, increase contact with your people. Okay, while we're on contact, it's also important to ensure that employees have sufficient contact with their colleagues. Evidence shows that maintaining relationships with coworkers lowers the risk of burnout and increases motivation and morale. One way to help in collegial connection building is to encourage peer-to-peer recognition. A study from Harvard Business School found that recognition from internal beneficiaries, which is basically contact in the form of recognition between colleagues, can dramatically increase motivation and performance. While peer recognition can cost your company nothing, it can have a significant and measurable impact on productivity and business outcomes. I'd also suggest that you find ways to encourage informal or water cooler conversations. During a regular in-person workday, individuals typically interact with their colleagues dozens of times, as we talked about. In remote work scenarios, they may only connect when they have a work-related reason. So impromptu and informal conversations between colleagues form a really critically important link to social connections, friendships, and support networks. This type of contact between colleagues is vital to engagement, especially during a time of crisis. Host remote social hours and encourage the use of tools like Teams or Slack to facilitate informal chats. At Achievers, we've been holding a monthly Thursday Throwdown, where employees from all parts of the organization can meet and socialize. I know many teams are also holding their own happy or yappy hours to maintain this kind of incredibly important contact. So rather than seeing this as taking away from work hours, I'd really encourage you to view it as crucial relationship building that will help your employees maintain contact with their colleagues and thus overall engagement. All right, so now you've seen the protective drivers and you understand the levers you can pull to impact them. Let's take a look next at the survey and the associated toolkit. I'll start with a short overview of how we develop these resources, and then I'll speak about how you can use them to affect positive change within your organization. Once research identified these 6 protective drivers, we knew that we next needed to find a way to effectively measure them. Because by surveying employees about their experiences in each area, leaders can then track how their organization is performing, both overall and with regard to each of those specific drivers. we designed an 8-question survey. That's one question for each protective driver. For example, we measure the protective driver of information sharing by asking employees whether they're receiving timely and credible information about the pandemic and the organizational plan to manage through it. In addition to the 8 protective driver questions, we also have an overall outcome measure. The question is, I have confidence in my organization's approach to manage through this event successfully. This statement is an essential metric to track as you iterate and improve based on the survey results. It allows you to see the impact of your actions. Finally, we have a single open-ended question to encourage employees to make any additional requests that might help them through this critical event. Our goal when developing surveys is always to ask the smallest possible number of questions to gather the most important information. Sure, you can endlessly add more questions into any sort of survey, but before you know it, you have a 50-question survey that's terribly difficult to translate into real-time action. In our experience, it's much better to ask a few truly important questions than to be exhaustive and never move from data to solving problems. Which brings me to the next topic I wanted to discuss, acting on results. At Achievers, we're not in the surveying business. We're in the changing the way the world works business. So once our survey was in place, we knew that we needed to ensure that organizations could easily act on the results. Research and practice tells us that managers play the most important role in supporting and engaging employees, so we decided that the development of a manager toolkit was the best way to empower people leaders to solve problems and drive meaningful change. The Critical Event Toolkit provides an overview and insight into each protective driver, and it includes a conversation starter, so managers can begin talking to their teams about these important issues right away. Why didn't we provide specific actions to drive each factor? Well, in our experience, an action library is typically quite stagnant and rarely used. Every team's needs are unique, and an action library can't effectively capture the nuances each individual team is facing. Instead, by starting conversations and encouraging managers to listen to their teams, we see actions arise from those conversations that are the right fit for that particular individual or team. Managers can also pass feedback back up to company leaders, who can then share organization-wide themes and provide additional action if needed. I'll talk a bit more about this process in a moment with examples from both Achievers and from one of our customers. But first, let's dive into the detail of the survey implementation. How do you use the survey to measure and manage those protective drivers? I'll answer that by first talking about the survey itself and then chat about the toolkit and taking action. The first implementation topic I want to touch in on is how this survey is different from your regular engagement survey. Perhaps you're wondering if you can just use your engagement survey to track how employees are doing and what they need. Well, the key difference between using an engagement survey and a critical event survey is that a critical event typically changes rapidly, while most engagement surveys are designed to be run once a year, and information gained from it can take weeks or even months to be collected and analyzed. Right now, we need to act quickly. We need rapid information, fast results, and effective actions. If you're already using a pulse survey, such as the one that we use here at Achievers, then you're further along that path. The survey we're talking about today, though, has been specifically designed also for a critical event. It was created in response to COVID-19, though it can also be used to monitor any critical event that your organization faces in the future. The questions are specific to those important during critical events, and the short nature of that survey means that it can be pushed out quickly and assessed efficiently. Launch. Okay, so you can use any survey tool to circulate these survey questions to your workforce. Achievers customers have been using the Achievers platform to do that, but you can also simply use a general surveying tool like SurveyMonkey to gather your data. At Achievers, we're running the survey monthly inside our own organization, and then we report back to our employees in our monthly town hall to share results and actions that we've identified. Best practice is to leave the survey open for 1 week. Remember, this is different from an engagement survey, and that's because things are changing minute by minute. And we're also aiming for a 60% or higher participation rate. We typically look for higher participation rates in engagement surveys, but given that we're surveying more often in this context, we tend to see a slightly lower participation rate. All of this is based on the need for rapid information gathering and action identification. It is critically important to stay on top of the changing employee experience while still ensuring enough time to take that meaningful action. Running the survey every 4 to 6 weeks will allow you to keep up with how your employees are doing and still drive action. And when your workforce sees you taking action based on the survey results, they'll be more likely to take part in that survey next time. Let's talk for a minute a bit more about that action. So you've run your survey, you've got your results, now you need to translate that data into problem-solving action. The great thing about having a simple survey with scaled responses from strongly disagree to strongly agree is that you don't need to be a data scientist to understand and analyze the results. Hotspots or problem areas, they should stand out right away. And this will be especially true as you drill down. You'll be able to see where specific departments differ from the overall results. Maybe your finance function isn't getting enough contact, or your HR function is struggling with work-life balance. As you identify specific areas of concern, loop in the relevant leaders to help determine the actions to take. Speaking of taking action, moving quickly, as I've mentioned, is important here. In a situation where things are changing so fast, as it is the case with this pandemic, your ability to react appropriately in real time can make a big difference. The employee experience is fluid, so acting while the information that's been gathered is recent and relevant, it'll help ensure that problems are addressed, allowing your workforce to be as well supported as possible. In our experience, communication during times of crisis is the most important primary action. The reason for this goes back to our discussion about those key protective drivers around information sharing. Even if you come across an issue you can't solve, communicating clearly and transparently about it, it'll help reduce uncertainty and ensure that your workforce feels heard. After Achievers first completed our survey internally, we reported on the results in the next monthly town hall meeting so that our employees knew that we were listening, we were invested in their responses, and that we were taking action in real time. To lock in those actions, review the results and identify 3 to 5 positives and 3 to 5 negatives. Where is the company doing really well? For example, when we at Achievers did our first critical event survey, we found that information sharing was a positive. Overall, our employees felt that we were communicating clearly and frequently. We had a single leader who communication came through, and we provided regular weekly Zoom updates to the whole company. This was great feedback to receive because we put a lot of thought and effort into our communication strategy, and it was great to know that it was working. Now, on the other hand, initially people were told that they would be working from home for 2 weeks. Now, as that time stretched on, there were resources that people hadn't picked up from their desks that they were missing. When we asked if they had the resources they needed to work effectively, many said no. From second monitors to good office chairs, there were a lot of basic resources missing from home offices. How did we solve this? Well, we opened the office for a morning, allowing people in, just a few at a time, to retrieve key items and take what they needed, including company equipment like chairs and monitors. The last thing I wanted to say about action is that being transparent about the things that aren't going well or that you can't act on right now actually helps build trust. Your employees already know which things are causing them headaches. So talking about them openly, I promise, doesn't create more dissatisfaction. Even if you can't fix something now, talking about it shows that you're listening and taking those concerns seriously. Let's talk about empowering managers during this process. Managers account for 70% of employee engagement, and so they're a key pillar in supporting employees through this period. And there's no better lever to pull to impact change than empowering managers to take meaningful action. So let's look at what you can do to give managers the tools that they need to make a difference. Now, we'd like to survey you and find out how much you think your managers are communicating with their team. In just a moment, you'll find that survey on the right-hand side of your screen. Once you do, please just take a moment to respond. I'll go ahead and read the question. The question is, how often are managers talking to team members about how they're doing? The options are daily, weekly, monthly, or I don't know. Looks like we're having a technical difficulty with our poll. So I think I'm just going to move on, but kind of just take into account or think about what your response would be there in terms of how much that contact is happening between managers and team members. And I would expect to see a range of responses because this journey is unfolding in different ways for every organization. But what's clear is that ensuring that managers are acting by making contact with their team members regularly is really critical to supporting employees today. All right, well, how else can we empower managers? Your managers are truly your first line of defense when it comes to supporting and engaging employees through a critical event. As we've talked about, manager communication and contact is key to engagement, with more passive management being correlated with even greater levels of dissatisfaction and absenteeism. When you're looking for actions to take to improve support across your company, start with your managers, because a small amount of effort here is likely to make the biggest difference to your people. Begin by educating them on these protective drivers. The Critical Event Toolkit from Achievers is a great first step in helping them understand the drivers, their impact on employees, and the questions they can ask to evaluate each area, and it's available to all of you. Just by being aware of the protective drivers and paying attention to their team's needs, managers will be able to drive more positive change. Let's dive a bit deeper into how managers can meaningfully support their teams. I want to take a moment to describe the ways in which they can provide a supportive environment for teams even during this time. And I'm going to speak to two types of behavior. The first I'll refer to as ask. Managers need to not only be thinking about the protective drivers themselves, but they also need to be asking their direct reports specific questions about the drivers and then remain accessible to receive questions or concerns over time. The first ask approach relies on a more formal system of asking these key questions during regular one-on-ones, which should be happening at least monthly, if not bi-weekly or weekly. Managers ought to give their teams advance notice to expect these questions so they have time to really think about their responses ahead of time. The second ask approach is the more casual check-in. For example, at the start of a regular team meeting, managers can casually check in with everyone on the call by asking how they're feeling today or how their workload is. It's important that managers model transparency and a sense of vulnerability by sharing their experience as well, letting people know if they're having a hard day or that they're behind on something that's due. That type of casual checking in and mutual sharing really encourages employees to be open about their own challenges in return. The second behavior after ask is act. Act is critical because if managers simply listen to everyone's ideas and concerns without taking action, eventually those teams will lose faith and trust. The best practice associated with act should sound familiar. It's communication. Back again. If there were a pop quiz about this presentation and you guessed communicate for each answer, you'd probably pass. And that's because it's important that managers communicate that their team has been heard and that they're ready to take action and that they need to be specific on what action they're going to take. Managers will often be able to solve problems raised directly, either on their own or with their team. But when they can't solve it themselves, they need to escalate the problem to someone who can. If the problem just simply can't be solved at the moment, which is sometimes the case in these unusual times, they still need to circle back to communicate. Hearing the message, I did my best, but we can't fix this, is far better than a lack of response. Remember, communication, the good, the bad, and the ugly, it builds trust, particularly during crisis. The final method for empowering your managers that I'll talk about today is to provide them with information about specific hotspots and areas of concern. Ideally, this information should be department-specific rather than organization-wide. This enables leaders to address their unique concerns facing their people instead of potentially missing the mark with generic responses. To turn knowledge into action, managers should talk to their teams. Ask those questions we talked about to analyze how team members are feeling and what they need. Individuals often already know how to solve a specific problem, and they're just waiting for a chance to share their insights. So by combining the knowledge gained from the survey with the questions in the toolkit, managers will be able to probe the right areas to get insights and ideas from their teams about the best way forward. Imagine, for just a moment, the powerful impact of this happening all over your organization. We're not talking here about one great manager looking for ways to support their team, but about empowering every leader to support every employee. That's the vision of this model and this survey. Before we wrap up and get to your questions, I wanted to share a quick story with you about a manufacturing company that used the Achievers Critical Event Survey and share with you the results that they were able to drive. This customer, a manufacturing company with more than 12,000 employees, both on and offline, leveraged the Achievers COVID-19 survey to reach out to their employees and collect feedback on their feelings and needs during this pandemic crisis. They received several thousand responses, and so they still made an effort to act quickly on what they learned. For example, employees were happy with the information that was being provided, and they felt their organization was doing a great job managing the situation. That data allowed the company to validate that their communication channels were effective. However, thanks to feedback on an open-ended question, they were also able to identify a need for more location-specific information. For example, while people were interested in the general company updates, they were even more interested in site-specific location information. That feedback allowed leaders to dive deeper and encourage them to provide more relevant location-specific information. The company was also able to identify actions to resolve issues based on employees' innovative ideas. For example, they found that employees wanted facilities to add sensor-operated doors and bathroom utilities to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. It was a solution they hadn't previously considered, but they were really happy to implement. Now, as a manufacturing company that had to remain open during the shelter-in-place order, collecting this feedback from employees about how they could feel more supported during that uncertain time was paramount. The commitment from the company to collect this feedback and the desire of so many employees, both online and offline, to have their voices heard really helped drive survey participation. Deploying the Achievers COVID-19 survey helped this company identify actions they could take to better support their employees. And the company shared with us that they intend to continue to circulate the survey to ensure that they're supporting their employees not only today, but throughout the duration of this pandemic. All right. That brings us to the end of our journey together today. Before I answer questions, I want to first summarize what I hope are the key takeaways from today's session, just to solidify them in your mind. First are the 5 risk factors we identified that are likely to be impacting your employees during this critical event. These should be top of mind as you think about how the pandemic is impacting your teams and your organization. We have that simple acronym to help remember all 5, WeBurn. That's well-being, balance, uncertainty, resources, and network. Next are the protective drivers that address each of these risk areas. Remember that your organization and leaders need to be finding ways to support well-being, balance, information sharing, support, and contact with leaders and colleagues. These drivers are really critical in empowering every employee during this period of time, and I provided you with some practical ideas of how to support each of them. Now, if you're interested, though, in learning more about any or all of those protective drivers, the Workforce Institute team has written in-depth insight papers for each one, which you can find at achievers.com/workforce-institute. Finally, taking prompt and impactful action on hotspots is key. Remember to keep it simple and focused. It's easy to get overwhelmed with the number of things you believe you need to do. Just pick a small number of actions that are going to have a noticeable impact on the problem that you're striving to solve. Remember, though, you do need to act quickly. That's important because the employee experience is always fluid, but even more so during a crisis. So the information you're gathering will change quickly. The sooner you act, the more of a positive impact you'll be able to have. And finally, remember that communication is your number one action. the more you communicate and the more clearly you communicate, the more trust you'll build in your workforce. And that trust will be key to keeping your people engaged as this situation changes day to day and moment to moment.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Natalie. Such an amazing overview of the survey and the toolkit. So much good information. Okay, we have a little bit of time for a few questions. I see some people have already submitted their questions in the panel, but if you have a question you want answered, please submit it now. Don't be shy. We're going to take our first question from Jill. And I love this one because it's about manager participation, which is something we get asked about quite a lot. The question is, Natalie, how can I encourage managers to actually use the toolkit?
That's a great question. And because if managers aren't using the toolkit, then we really can't be driving these protective, drivers and resources. So, I think building the questions into a manager's typical processes and working with their employees is really helpful, and it keeps that top of mind. So I encourage managers to actually build the questions into their one-on-ones, whether those are happening once a week, every 2 weeks, or monthly, hopefully at least. That managers are just kind of rolling through the list, checking in on, do you have the support you need? How is your balance going? Do you have the resources that you need to do your job effectively? Are you having enough contact with me? Are you having enough contact with our colleagues? So I think that, it's really important to share the questions first with your entire team, so that they know what they are and the purpose behind them, that they're not intended to be intrusive, but to be helpful. And then just letting the team know that, that about, at a regular meeting about once a month, that you're going to be checking in, that the manager is going to be asking about how those things are going. And what I find is that then that helps employees kind of keep those topics, those protective drivers in their mind, if they know they're going to have a pointed opportunity to talk with their managers about that. Now, of course, if managers are sensing something, in between those monthly protective driver, check-ins, they of course should feel free to leverage the questions. And I'll reiterate, by letting employees know that the managers letting employees know they're going to be asking about them, then it tends, what I hear is it tends not to feel intrusive, because they're expecting that might happen.
I love that. Build on whatever processes you currently have, whether it's one-on-ones or whatever. A lot of times the most effective approach isn't necessarily building net new procedures, but building on the infrastructure that's already there. I love it. Okay, our next question we're going to take is from Andrew, and I love this one because I actually want to know Dr. Natalie's take on this. He asks, what tips do you have for supporting your team's work-life balance?
Yes, what an important question, because I think we can all relate to when I say all, I mean around the entire globe, we can all relate to the reality that work-life balance is become, in many cases, more challenging during this new reality, where most people either have been or continue to be working from home, whether they were prepared to or not. And so that really stretches those, the kind of stressors related to work-life balance in many cases. And I think, it varies a lot from individual to individual and from team to team. As I mentioned, one really important suggestion is to make sure that your managers and your senior leaders are modeling good work-life balance. We've, talked about that inside Achievers and our own senior leadership team about ensuring that we're talking about the times that we're taking for ourselves or our families to rest, or that we're, as an organization, we've looked at having we've actually instated a quiet hour over the lunch hour in the time zone that most of our employees work within. It might mean switching off early or taking vacation days or not responding to emails in the evening. When leadership at the very highest level, and also when your direct manager is doing that, it gives an employee permission to do the same. And then secondly, I would say, besides modeling, is asking your team, like, what would help you gain better balance? Maybe it's about moving meetings to a different time, or taking out some meetings. That's something that there's been a lot of conversation about in the business psychology arena. Just removing some of those meetings so that there's some more white space to either take a break or take a walk, or or just be able to focus on a project where you're making progress within work. So and when I just mentioned walk, it's something else that there's been some research and writing about, is taking those calls when possible outside. So if you're in an environment where it's safe for you to be outside and walking around while engaging in a call, that could be incredibly helpful to just feeling like there's some more diversity in your day and some sense of balance. So I think but most importantly, I would say to first model balance yourselves, and then to ask what your team needs, because we're all very different, and what might work for one individual or team might be different from that for another.
I love that, especially what you said about walk. I was listening to this Gartner podcast yesterday where they work with a big tech company in the Bay Area who they all have like Fitbits or different like smartwatches, and they've shown that walking across their like 20,000 employee base has decreased 60% since the pandemic. So I think walking can do all of us a little bit good, and you're so on point about the fact that like balance really is one of those initiatives that starts from the top down. Like if my leader and my manager isn't modeling that behavior, I'm not going to feel very empowered to do the same. So thank you for that. And that is all of the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your questions and participation. On the screen, you can see a few additional resources, where to find more from the Workforce Institute, how to connect with us, how to connect with Dr. Natalie. You can subscribe to get more content from the Workforce Institute on our page so that you never miss a report or a webinar. And I want to send a big shout out and thank you to Dr. Natalie for all your wisdom and sharing all this great information and for your time. And to everyone, thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks very much.
Ciao.